Harden to try to give Philadelphia the tools to go out and improve this Sixers team. It allows them to use their full mid-level exception at $10.5 million, a biannual exception that starts at $4 million, and also make some trades. But what Harden has really talked to the Sixers about was trying to do what he could to allow Daryl Morey and Elton Brand and their front office to go out and surround he and Joel Embiid with the kind of players and the kind of toughness, physical toughness, mental toughness that they felt they lacked in the playoffs last year.
Interesting. You know, Harden came into Philly when he came by trade. He talked about team first. Not a lot of people believed it at the time, but now maybe he's showing it. What do you make of these moves from Harden?
One of the things that we see that is very difficult to deal with in the NBA is sometimes star players in their mid-30s who maybe don't recognize where it's transitioning with their game. This is James Harden, frankly, having some self-awareness. Now, you could argue that self-awareness comes from the reality that he wasn't a max player in the market anymore, and they didn't have teams that were going to offer it to him anyway, including Philadelphia. But I do give him credit for saying, okay, I need to make an adjustment in my game, which is most important. I need to make an adjustment in the way I approach this contract. And by doing this, even though he's still a guy who's going to be very highly paid, he's still a guy that is going to have high expectations, he's changing the narrative. And we know that in Philadelphia particularly, the narrative and how you're viewed can affect how you live your day-to-day life. And
yes.
You just asked Mr. Ben Simmons about that. And so I do think that Harden is doing some things here that potentially could really help the Sixers, not only with around him, but the way Harden is going to approach this phase of his career.
Well, and it should be noted, too, after Game 6 against Miami in the second round, when they lost and their season ended in Philly at Wells Fargo Center for the second season in a row, James Harden was asked about his contract status, and he said he was going to do whatever it took to make this team as good as possible going forward. He has backed that up today. He now has to back it up on the court next season. But this is a significant thing, taking less money now so they can use these extra exceptions they have to make the team better and go into next season with the best chance they have to win.
I'm really impressed by him. He put his money where his mouth is, and that's what Philadelphia fans want. They want players who not only want to be there, who want to win, but actually when they say they're going to do something, they do something. Now, there's still the issue, Brian, of how much money he actually gives up. How do you see that playing out?
Based on the projections of what it's going to take to trigger those exceptions, I think he's going to be giving up 8 figures just in this season alone. So I think he'll drop from $47 million that he could have got with his option to back into the mid-30s. Now, he will guarantee tens of millions over the course of a multi-year contract. Again, let's not lay awake tonight and worry about James Harden.
And we should also point out, this isn't James Harden walking away from a max contract to take less money. James Harden was not going to get a max contract. So really what this is, rather than taking away money he was going to get, it's really reallocating money he was going to get over a period of time.
But he didn't have to
it's not to diminish the impact on this season, but I think it's also important to note that this isn't him necessarily taking a massive haircut from what he was overall going to get. It's just spreading it out in a different way that allows the Sixers to be much better now.
I think what's interesting, though, is how many superstars do you see, and touching on your point, doing something like this? Does it show you that he's more focused on winning in terms of winning a title than he ever has been?
I think it goes back to what you said before about putting his money where his mouth was. When he said that after that game back in May, I took it at the time as him saying, if I need to take less money for us to be in a good place to win, that's what I'm going to do. To your point, that isn't always something he's necessarily been known to do. The fact that he did it now, I do think it's a significant thing, especially because it gives them a chance to get P.J. Tucker, exactly the kind of guy that they need, assuming they can get that son. They went and got the Anthony Melton last week. They're adding the kind of pieces around Tyrese Maxey, Joel Embiid, and James Harden that this team needs to be a real contender in the East, and I think they're on the path to doing that.
And he's doing it at a time when guys like Russell Westbrook aren't doing it, that's not to knock Russell Westbrook. I wouldn't do it in many ways, but still.
If at the opening of free agency a year ago, which was actually in August, not July because of the calendar, you'd have told James Harden that he was going to be doing this now, he wouldn't have believed you. If you'd have told him he was doing this now with the Sixers, he wouldn't have believed you. But he has reacted to those changes by being adaptive. And so for that, in this era where we don't see that, he deserves a measure of credit.
He really does. I give him some credit, and we'll see where this goes in terms of who the Sixers bring in and whether or not that can actually lead to a title, which is what people in Philly really want. And you know what they want in Brooklyn? They want a title too. And Kyrie Irving, he filed his paperwork to pick up his $36.5 million option for the Nets next season. Sources told ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski. Now, earlier this week, there was all that drama surrounding Kyrie after he released that list of teams that he would consider in a trade. Here they are: Lakers, Clippers, Knicks, Heat, Mavericks, and the Sixers. But some very interesting destinations, obviously, on that list, like the Knicks. And it'd be interesting to see him play for the Sixers after Harden reportedly wanted out because of Kyrie. It's a whole thing. But anyway, Wendy, when we look at that list, what's the reaction around the league? What was that reaction when they saw this list?
Cool.
Cool. Okay. That's it?
I mean,
not fired up. We're going to get Kyrie in-house.
I know that, like, especially in other sports, you know, I mean, by the way, there are role players in the NBA who want to be traded and they provide lists. It happens. Mm-hmm. And it's always an interesting thing. And a lot of times when a team is listed on a list, it's like, oh, this is interesting. Let's have a discussion. By the way, those teams did have discussions. Some of those teams saw this coming in the last month and had discussions. Do we want Kyrie Irving here? But the demand for Kyrie Irving on a long-term contract just doesn't exist right now.
Look, this goes back to what Adrian Wojnarowski reported the other day, right? There's this list of teams out there. Hey, Kyrie, you can go seek out a sign and trade. There was one team that was willing to do it. That was the Lakers. Why? Because the Lakers had no other option.
Do you know why they let him go seek a sign and trade?
Why?
Because they knew there wasn't going to be one.
So they called his bluff.
Yes. And Kyrie took the cards and said, fold.
Kyrie wanted a long-term extension in Brooklyn. This list was designed to try to get him a long-term extension in Brooklyn. It didn't work. He opted into his deal. He's now on a one-year contract in Brooklyn.
But this was nothing like the Russell Wilson list that he put out.
No,
in football, where it was like, oh my God, Russell Wilson.
The Seahawks wanted Russell Wilson on their team, and other teams wanted Russell Wilson on their team. This is a situation where Kyrie looked around and didn't have a chair except for his option, which he was contractually able to pick up.
He folded his cards, but the game isn't over. So more hands are going to be played, and so we'll see how those develop.
So speaking of that, hands that need to be played, we know what Kyrie, at least we think we know what Kyrie wants, which is to get a max deal somewhere, preferably with the Nets. What must he do to get a max deal from the Nets?
Well, it would help to be on the court and play. I mean, that would be the first step.
That would be step one.
No, but I mean, is it like 70 games and a title or anything short of a title won't make it happen?
Look,
that kind of thing.
I think, you know, as I've said many times, you can only answer Kyrie questions with maybe. And that goes with this too. But if Kyrie Irving is on the court this season and plays well for the Nets, I mean, remember, he was an All-NBA guard 2 years ago, right? If the Nets make a deep playoff run, if Kyrie's on the court for a bunch of games, if they play well, if everything looks great, sure, something could change in the future. He could get a long-term deal for him. I'm not ruling it out.
How things had changed with James Harden over the course of 9 months. Mm-hmm. We could see things change. Kyrie was a 50-40-90 player 2 years ago. He was almost a 50-40-90 player this last year, but he only played, not as many games. If he has a good year and the Nets profit as an organization, I think they could see it. But I think the days of Kyrie Irving getting a 4-year contract offer, which is what he was looking for here, I would be surprised if he ever gets that again from anybody.
Wow, no matter what. Title even.
I mean, I'm not saying no matter what to anything because we're in the NBA. But again, step one with James Harden was helping the Sixers be in a better position to win. Step one for Kyrie Irving will be getting on the court in October.
Take it one step at a time.
That's all you can do.
And we'll see how it works out for these Nets. All right, guys.